What secrets do soldiers keep from the people they love most? When you're writing a letter home from a muddy hole in France, trying to reassure your mother or your sweetheart that everything's fine when artillery is falling 100 yards away and you've just watched your friend die, what truth do you tell and what truth do you hide? Is it kindness to shield them from the reality of war? Or is it cowardice, an inability to share the burden you're carrying? And what happens when you find someone else's letters, words never sent, confessions never shared, raw truths written in moments of desperation and then hidden away because they were too honest, too revealing, too frightening to actually send home? I'm 97 years old, and in 1944 I found a collection of unsent letters in a trench in France. Letters written by soldiers who couldn't bring themselves to mail the words they'd written. Those letters changed how I understood courage and fear, changed what I wrote in my own letters, changed my entire relationship with truth and secrecy. This is the story of what I found in that trench, what those hidden words revealed, and how they've haunted me for 80 years. My name is Daniel Robert Morrison, and I was a 21-year-old sergeant in the 4th Infantry Division, fighting through France in the summer and fall of 1944. We'd landed at Utah Beach on D-Day, fought through the hedgerows of Normandy, liberated Paris, and by September were pushing toward the German border through some of the most miserable terrain and weather imaginable. The fall of 1944 was wet and cold, endless rain that turned everything to mud, that made foxholes fill with water, that soaked through every layer of clothing until you couldn't remember what it felt like to be dry. We lived in that mud, fought in it, slept in it when we could sleep at all, and it became as much an enemy as the Germans shooting at us. On September 24th, 1944, my platoon was ordered to relieve another unit that had been holding a section of the line near the town of Geilenkirchen. The position was a series of trenches and foxholes that had been occupied by various units over several weeks, constantly improved and expanded, gradually taking on the character of semi-permanent fortifications, despite being less than a mile from German positions. When we arrived to take over, the unit we were relieving looked like ghosts, hollow-eyed and filthy, exhausted beyond measure from weeks of constant shelling and patrol actions. They gave us a quick brief on the sector, pointed out German positions, warned us about areas that were particularly dangerous, and then they were gone, stumbling toward the rear and whatever rest awaited them. My squad occupied a stretch of trench that was better constructed than most, with proper revetments and drainage and even a small dugout that provided overhead cover. It was clear that soldiers had spent considerable time here, had made improvements, had tried to create something approaching livable conditions in the midst of the misery. As we were settling in, organizing our gear, establishing watch rotations, Private Tommy Anderson called out that he'd found something. I went to see what he'd discovered, and he showed me a metal ammunition box that had been buried in the trench wall, hidden behind some boards, probably placed there intentionally by previous occupants. I pulled out the box and opened it, expecting to find ammunition or maybe some contraband that soldiers had stashed. Instead, I found letters, dozens of them, maybe 50 or 60 letters in various stages of completion. Some were finished, sealed in envelopes addressed but never stamped or mailed. Others were just pages of writing, stream of consciousness thoughts that trailed off mid-sentence. A few were dated, most weren't. The handwriting varied, indicating multiple authors, soldiers from different units who'd occupied this position over weeks or months, but they all shared one characteristic. They were unsent, hidden away instead of being placed in the mail, secrets that their authors had written but couldn't bring themselves to share. I should have left them alone, should have respected the privacy of the men who'd written them, should have reburied the box and pretended I'd never found it. But I didn't. I was curious, wanted to understand why soldiers would write letters and then hide them instead of sending them. So that night, while on watch in the trench, I read them, all of them. And what I found in those letters changed everything I thought I understood about courage and fear and the performance we all maintained for the people back home. The first letter I read was dated July 15, 1944, written by a private named John Mitchell from Ohio. It was addressed to his mother but never sent, and it started with the kind of cheerful tone that characterized most letters home. He talked about the weather, about French countryside, about meals and his buddies, and mundane details designed to reassure her that he was fine. But then, about halfway through, the tone shifted dramatically. He wrote, "Mom, I need to tell you something I can't tell you in the letters I actually send. I'm scared all the time, not just during combat, but every minute of every day. I'm scared of being killed, scared of being maimed, scared of letting my friends down, scared of being a coward. The fear is so constant that I can't remember what it felt like to not be afraid. And the worst part is I have to pretend I'm not scared, have to act brave for the other guys, have to write letters home that sound confident and optimistic when inside I'm screaming. I don't know how much longer I can keep up this act. I don't know how much longer I can be the person everyone thinks I am. I'm sorry, Mom. I know you raised me to be brave, but I'm not. I'm just a scared kid pretending to be a soldier, and someday soon that pretense is going to fail and everyone will see what I really am." The letter ended there, unsigned, unsent, hidden away, because John Mitchell couldn't bear to send those words to his mother, couldn't shatter her image of him as brave and confident. I later learned from unit records that Private John Mitchell was killed on July 28, 1944, less than 2 weeks after writing that letter. His official death notice would have praised his bravery and sacrifice, would have assured his mother that her son died doing his duty. But that unsent letter told a different truth, revealed the terror and self-doubt that he'd hidden from everyone while he was alive. I read another letter, this one from a corporal named Robert Hayes from Michigan, dated August 3, 1944, addressed to his fiancée but never sent. He wrote about missing her, about counting the days until he could come home, about the life they'd build together. Standard soldier love letter material, the kind of thing I'd written myself dozens of times. But then he wrote something that stopped me cold. "Sarah, I have to confess something that I can't tell you in the letters I send. I've become someone you wouldn't recognize. I've killed men, lots of them, and I don't feel anything about it anymore. The first time was horrible, traumatic, something that haunted my dreams. But after that it got easier, and now it's just something I do, as casual as any other task. I see a German soldier and I shoot him, and I feel nothing except maybe satisfaction at removing a threat. What does that make me? Am I still the man you agreed to marry, or have I become something else, something broken that can kill without remorse? I'm scared that when I come home you'll look at me and see a monster instead of the boy you loved. I'm scared that I won't be able to turn off this coldness, won't be able to feel normal things again. I don't know if I should come home at all, if it's fair to bring this darkness into your life." Robert Hayes survived the war. I checked the records later, made it all the way through to Germany and came home in 1945. But I wonder if he ever told Sarah what he'd written in that letter, if he ever shared those fears about what war had turned him into. Or did he maintain the performance, pretend to be the same person he'd been before, hide the darkness he'd acquired? Either way, that letter revealed something profound about what combat does to people, how it changes us in ways we can't admit to the people we love most. I read letter after letter that night and over the following nights, stealing moments during watch to work through the entire collection. Some were short, just a few paragraphs of raw confession. Others were long, pages and pages of thoughts and fears and observations that their authors needed to express but couldn't share. The letters revealed patterns, common themes that emerged across different writers from different backgrounds. Almost all of them talked about fear, about the terror that consumed them, and that they had to hide from their comrades and from their families. Many talked about guilt, about things they'd done or hadn't done, about friends they'd failed to save, about civilians they'd harmed. Several talked about the disconnection they felt from their pre-war selves, the sense that the person their family remembered no longer existed. One letter that particularly struck me was from a lieutenant named Charles Peterson from California, addressed to his father. He wrote, "Dad, you always told me that leadership meant making hard decisions, meant putting the mission and the men first, meant carrying responsibility that lesser men couldn't handle. But you never told me that leadership meant sending men to their deaths, meant making choices that you know will kill some of your soldiers, meant carrying that weight forever. I've ordered men into situations I knew were deadly. I've sacrificed individuals for the good of the platoon. I've made calculations about acceptable casualties, and those men died because I ordered them to. Died trusting that I knew what I was doing. Died believing their sacrifice mattered. But I don't know if it mattered. Don't know if those deaths accomplished anything except keeping other men alive a little longer until they died too. How do you live with that? How do you make peace with being responsible for so many deaths? I can't ask you this in a real letter because I know what you'd say. That I did my duty, that leadership requires hard choices, that the deaths aren't my fault. But they are my fault, Dad. I gave the orders and men died, and I have to live with that even if you don't think I should feel guilty. I checked the records and found that Lieutenant Charles Peterson was killed on September 12, 1944, 12 days before I found his letter. He'd carried that guilt for however long, had written about it but never sent the letter, and then he died with those feelings unexpressed. His father would have gotten an official notification praising his son's leadership and bravery, would have been told that Charles died heroically leading his men, but that unsent letter told a different story, revealed the moral weight of command, the burden that comes with being responsible for other people's lives and deaths. Reading these letters forced me to confront my own dishonesty, the performance I'd been maintaining in my own letters home. I'd been writing cheerful letters to my parents and to my girlfriend Helen, letters that described France as beautiful and my buddies as characters in an adventure story, and combat as something exciting rather than terrifying. I'd been protecting them from the truth, but I'd also been protecting myself, maintaining an image of who I was supposed to be rather than admitting who I actually was. The unsent letters showed me that everyone was doing this, that the whole army was engaged in a massive collective deception, soldiers lying to their families and families believing the lies because the truth was too painful. That night, after reading through most of the collection, I tried to write an honest letter to Helen. I tried to tell her what combat was really like, tried to describe the fear and the exhaustion and the way death became so common it lost its impact. I tried to explain how I'd changed, how the boy she'd known in high school was gone, replaced by someone harder and colder and more capable of violence. I filled 3 pages with raw truth, things I'd never written before, things I'd never admitted even to myself. And when I was done, when I'd poured everything out onto paper, I read it over and realized I couldn't send it. It was too much, too honest, too frightening. Helen didn't need to know these things, didn't need to carry the weight I was carrying. So I tore up the letter, buried the pieces in the mud, and wrote a different letter, a cheerful one about French wine and beautiful countryside, and how I couldn't wait to come home. The performance continued. But I kept reading the unsent letters, kept discovering new confessions and fears and truths that their authors had been unable to share. One letter was from a medic named Thomas Wright, writing to his wife about the helplessness of trying to save men who were too badly wounded, about watching soldiers die despite his best efforts, about the guilt of triaging casualties and choosing who to try to save and who to let die. Another was from a private named James Murphy, writing to his brother about killing a German soldier in hand-to-hand combat, about seeing the man's face up close, about realizing the German was probably someone's brother too. Another was from a sergeant named William Parker, writing to his son about fear that he'd die before seeing the boy grow up, about regrets for time wasted before the war, about all the things he wished he'd said and done differently. Each letter revealed a different facet of the war experience, a different truth that couldn't be spoken aloud or written in letters that would actually be sent. Together, they created a collective confession, a hidden archive of what soldiers really felt beneath the brave faces and optimistic letters and determination to do their duty. These men had needed to express these thoughts, needed to write them down to process them, but they couldn't share them with the people they were written to. So they'd hidden them, buried them in ammunition boxes and trench walls, created secret archives of truth that no one was supposed to find. I added my own letter to the collection, the honest one I'd written to Helen, and then torn up. I reconstructed it from memory, wrote it all out again, sealed it in an envelope addressed to her but with no stamp, and placed it in the ammunition box with all the others. Then I reburied the box in the trench wall in a slightly different location, making it available for whoever occupied this position next. Maybe they'd find it. Maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they'd read the letters like I had. Or maybe they'd respect privacy and leave them alone. But the archive would be there, growing with each unit that passed through, a secret history of the war written in words that could never be sent home. My platoon held that position for 2 weeks before being rotated to a different sector. In that time, I checked the ammunition box several times and found that it had grown. Other soldiers had discovered it, had read the letters, and had added their own. By the time we left, there were maybe 70 or 80 letters in the box, confessions and fears and truths from dozens of soldiers. The archive was becoming something larger than any individual contribution, was becoming a collective testimony to the gap between what soldiers experienced and what they could tell the people they loved. I never told anyone about the letters, not while the war was ongoing and not for decades afterward. It felt like violating a confidence, like betraying the trust of men who'd written those words in private moments. But the letters stayed with me, shaped how I understood my own war experience, gave me permission to acknowledge truths I'd been suppressing. I wasn't uniquely scared or guilty or changed. Everyone felt these things. The difference was that most of us never admitted them, maintained the performance until it became so ingrained we couldn't separate the act from reality. The war ended in May 1945, and I came home to New York in July. Helen was waiting, faithful and loving, and we married in August like we'd planned. But I was different from the boy she'd fallen in love with, changed in ways I couldn't fully explain. I tried to reintegrate into civilian life, tried to be the person everyone expected me to be, but the performance was exhausting. I'd spent years hiding my true feelings, years maintaining an image of bravery and confidence I didn't feel, and I didn't know how to stop. The unsent letters had shown me that everyone was doing this, that the whole generation of veterans was engaged in collective deception, but that knowledge didn't make it easier. Helen knew something was wrong, knew I was struggling, but I couldn't explain it to her. How could I tell her about the letters, about the confessions I'd read, about my own letter that I'd never sent? How could I explain that the cheerful letters I'd written during the war were lies? That the real truth was hidden in a trench in France and would probably never be found? So I said nothing, maintained the silence, added peacetime deception to the wartime performance. And that silence created distance between us, a gap that we never fully bridged despite 60 years of marriage. In 1994, for the 50th anniversary of D-Day, I went back to France with a group of veterans. We visited the beaches, walked the ground we'd fought over, paid respects to the men who hadn't made it home. And I tried to find the trench where I'd discovered the letters, tried to locate the exact position where I'd buried the ammunition box. But 50 years had passed, the landscape had changed, and I couldn't find it. The trenches had been filled in, the area reclaimed by farmers, and there was no trace of the fortifications that had seemed so permanent in 1944. The letters were buried somewhere beneath peaceful French farmland, a secret archive that might never be found, truths that would remain hidden forever. I wondered what had happened to those letters, whether anyone had found them after we'd moved out, whether the archive had continued to grow through the winter of 1944 and into 1945. Did it survive the war, or was it destroyed by artillery or discovered and disposed of by some officer who thought soldiers shouldn't be writing such honest things? Were those confessions still buried in that field, waiting to be discovered by a farmer, or a construction crew, or an archaeologist? Or had they decomposed, the paper rotting away, the words dissolving back into the mud that had created them? I'll never know, and that uncertainty is part of what haunts me. Helen died in 2008, and in her final days I finally told her about the letters. I explained about finding them in the trench, about reading other soldiers' confessions, about writing my own honest letter and never sending it. I told her that the cheerful letters I'd written during the war were performances, that the real truth had been too scary to share. She listened quietly, held my hand, and when I was done she said, "I know, Danny. I always knew. You came home different and you never told me why, and I knew there were things you couldn't talk about. I wish you'd trusted me with the truth, but I understand why you didn't. I'm just glad you told me now, before it's too late." That conversation, 53 years after I'd found the letters, was the first time I'd been truly honest with her about my war experience. And it was almost too late. I'm 97 years old now, and the letters remain one of the most significant discoveries of my life. They showed me that beneath the surface of heroism and duty and determination, soldiers were scared and guilty and confused, struggling to reconcile what they were asked to do with who they'd been before the war. They showed me that everyone maintains performances, hides truths, creates public personas that diverge from private reality, and they showed me the cost of that deception, the distance it creates, the intimacy it prevents, the weight of carrying secrets that can never be shared. I wish I'd sent my honest letter to Helen. I wish I'd trusted her with the truth instead of hiding it for decades. I wish I'd been braver about emotional honesty instead of just brave about facing enemy fire. But I understand why I didn't. Understand why all those other soldiers wrote letters they never sent. The truth was too raw, too frightening, too likely to hurt the people we loved. So we kept our secrets, buried them in trenches and in our hearts, maintained the performance until it became indistinguishable from reality. That's what those letters revealed. The gap between experience and expression, between what we felt and what we could admit to feeling. The secrets in the trenches were secrets of fear and doubt and transformation, truths that soldiers couldn't share with the people who loved them most. Those unsent letters created an archive of honesty that existed outside the official narrative of the war, outside the heroic stories and the grateful remembrance. They showed the human cost of combat in ways that casualty statistics and official histories never could. And they remained hidden, buried literally and figuratively because the truth was too painful to be spoken aloud. That's the real secret of war, not tactical information or strategic planning, but the emotional reality that soldiers carry and never fully share, the private truths that remain buried in trenches and in hearts long after the shooting stops. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the hidden truths soldiers carry and the performances we all maintain, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to hear more stories from World War II veterans. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember that behind every cheerful letter home was a soldier struggling with fear and guilt and transformation, writing truths they couldn't send. Remember that the gap between what we experience and what we can express is often unbridgeable, and that secrets kept out of love are still secrets that isolate us. Thank you for listening to this old soldier's story about letters never sent and truths never told, about the secrets we keep in trenches and in our hearts.